All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's meeting of the Budget Review Committee. With that, I'll call the May 19th, 2021 regular Budget Review Committee meeting to order. And I'll now call the roll. Pepin is here. McKeon? Goff?
Present.
Carruthers? And Vigneault. All right, will Nick Carruthers please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you. On to public comment. In accordance with state law, an item not scheduled on the agenda may be brought forward by the general public for comment. However, the committee members will not be able to discuss or take action on any issue not included on the agenda. You may speak up to 3 minutes. Speakers have one opportunity to address the committee under public comment. If you are on the phone and you wish to speak on this item, please press *9 now. Once it's time, the city clerk will unmute you in the order received. As a reminder to those calling in, when speaking, please remember to keep some distance from your microphone so that those who are watching at home are able to hear you clearly. Do we have any public speakers? Seeing none, we'll move on to staff items. Staff item number 1 is the approval of the May 12th, 2021 regular Budget Review Committee meeting minutes. If you're on the phone and you wish to speak on this item, please press *9 now. Once it's time, the city clerk will call you in the order received. Do we have any speakers here? No? Seeing none, that concludes that. Do we have any committee discussion on the minutes? If not, then we'll entertain a motion for this.
I move we approve, yeah, or second.
Do you want me to call that out, or a motion by Nick and a second by Peter? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nope. The record will reflect that motion passed unanimously. On to item number 2, discussion of Budget Review Committee recommendations to the council. If you're on the phone and you wish to speak on this item, please press *9 now. Once it's time, the city clerk will call you in the order received. City clerk, do we have any speakers on this? Seeing none, we will move on to committee discussion. Okay, so first off, I just want to thank everyone for this whole process. We're on our fourth week here, and it's always, you know, it's interesting trying to get 5 people's edits and thoughts and everything together. So hopefully this process has worked for everyone. I really appreciate the careful thought and attention you've all given to this whole process and to this final, the memo that we're putting together tonight. So what we've got in front of you is 4 documents, document A, B, C, and D, and hopefully this will help kind of keep us all on track tonight. So document A was the edits from everyone here minus Danielle. I was able to do that earlier than this afternoon, so we were able to get those compiled and merged together. And so document B reflects those merges into one Word document. Danielle had a lot of great input, really substantial thought put into this clearly, and we thank you so much for that. It just, I wasn't able to have time to put it all together. That's fine. So document C is everything merged together, but you may find it just a bit unwieldy. So document D, we have Danielle's recommended edit. So what I would, and we can do this however the committee wants, but what I would recommend would be maybe going off of document A and document D, and kind of comparing those. And Danielle, please, feel free if there's anything that, any of the formatting or anything that you've pointed out that you wanted to speak to, please do that. I don't know, does that work for everyone if we kind of look at those 2 documents? And please let me know if you would like, 10-minute recess to make sure you get a good chance to review both, the document A, which is a bunch of our edits put together, and document D, which is the great edits that Danielle has put together. That's sort of what I'm thinking we do.
The document that we were given last week, is that kind of the crux of A, and then you just kind of merged people?
Yeah, exactly. So document A is largely what you saw last week, with a number of edits, and again, those are on document B. You can kind of see what was changed from the original document to document B, so that's a great place to start. You know, as an example,
Just from like a formatting standpoint, I think the way that it states is where you have like the bold and the underline as what is gonna be in discussion below. I think we should carry that throughout. And, then if I think it should start general and then get more specific. So if there's some kind of way how the budget is, you know, formatted, how, you know, we start with the general fund and then work to specific funds, we might, you know, do stuff like that in the draft.
Okay, so I can explain a little bit about sort of my thinking when I structured the initial document. You know, there's sort of the preamble there about, you know, as a BRC, we're presenting this to the mayor and council, and then the introduction really kind of sets the tone of, you know, giving some context to what we were looking at last year with the retrenchment and everything else. And then we go into a summary of Poway's FY 2021 through 2022 proposed budget. This part right there is sort of a kind of an opener. Again, you know, we kind of set the tone that generally the city is, you know, a well-managed city with a long history of good accounting procedures, et cetera, et cetera. And then going into the overview, I had, as I think I mentioned last week, you know, the overview kind of addresses the income, essentially, the revenue situation. And then I thought that it was prudent to break out the expenditures into the next section, because those are, you know, obviously revenues are, there's only so much we can do about that, given that it's based off of tax revenue and the economy and all of that. And then expenditures are, you know, things that the city itself can really affect in a lot of cases. So that's why I broke it down that way. So that whole section there sort of, in my mind, sets the whole tone, kind of sets the table for the whole report, gives a big picture of the city and the current situation, and the revenue picture, and the expenditure picture, and then we go into specific items of note, and that's where we start breaking it down into, you know, concerns about personnel costs or revenue growth, development services department, et cetera, et cetera. So that was my thinking on how I structured that, just for a little background for everyone. Would, if anyone would like to do a quick recess to make sure we all have a good chance to look at this, please, you know, let me know. Happy to do that.
Sure, why don't we do that? Why don't we take 10 minutes to read?
Does that sound good, staff? If we take a 10-minute recess, where we won't be discussing anything amongst the committee, just 10 minutes to review these documents. Great, thank you.
I come get one, yeah.
I'm good, thank you.
We'll reconvene in a couple minutes if that's good with everyone. Okay, we will reconvene. I wanted to ask one question of staff. I want to make sure that we got it right on page 1 of document A at the very bottom. It says under overview, while the budget is balanced, it is important for the mayor and council to understand that this is only because of federal stimulus dollars from the American Rescue Act totaling almost 9.3 million over the next 2 years.
That's not true, I don't think. Is
Yeah, I
it?
wanted to just make sure I had this right. So is that accurate?
Yeah, so this, based on the estimates that, we have, 9.3 million is Poway's estimate of the ARP funds. And then it's being, according to, you know, the original, law, distributed in 2 equal payments. One that should be soon, and then one year from now. So in the budget, we're showing that in the 2021 numbers and the 21-22 numbers. And so, yes, for 21-22, we would be currently showing a deficit if not for that revenue that's been budgeted for.
So I'll change it, instead of totaling almost 9.3, it's more accurate to say estimated to total almost 9.3 million?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's based on the data that we have so far.
Mr. Chair, if I can nuance one thing, it's important to know that absent that stimulus money, we would still be presenting a balanced budget. It would look different than it does today, but it would be a balanced budget that would be presented.
How so?
This is the rule, right?
Well, we would have to go through, similar to last year's budget, and identify items
To
to
slash.
defer, yeah,
Gotcha,
or remove, yes.
gotcha.
Thanks for clarifying all that.
And so is
Good to know.
that something, you know, part of the context of the info was, I think from a readability for a lay person or even somebody who's really never looked at city budgets, most people work on calendar year, they're not used to fiscal year. And so I tried to be clear in some of my language identifying, you know, what fiscal year last year versus this year, that we're proposing. And so maybe that's something where you add that language of the fiscal year 2021 and fiscal year and proposed fiscal year 21-22 as a total. Because we're not gonna see any line item that says 9.3 million in the budget for this year that's we're talking about. Correct?
So the 9.3 is not shown for 21-22. Half of that is shown in that other column. Let me bring that up real quick. So in these two numbers here, these $7 million numbers, that's where the American Recovery Plan estimates are sitting. If you look at the prior, sorry, wrong thing. If you look at the, you look at the prior year trend in that line item, it's, you know, $2-3 million. And then in 2021, this is the 2021 estimated, it jumps to 7 million to 21-22, also, you know, in the $7 million range. So the money is being shown there, but you're correct that you're not going to see a specific single line item that says American Recovery Act on it.
And I don't want the people to get confused, where's the 9.3 million? That's my point, is that we're talking about, if we're talking about fiscal year 21-22, then we talk, what are we getting in 21-22? Versus if you're talking about 2021, what are you, and you can say like a combined 2 fiscal years, right?
So what could I put in there for FY 22? Do we know?
Just half of that amount.
Just exactly half?
Yeah, it was described as 2 equal payments, so,
4.6? Okay, got it.
Perfect.
So we'll say that, to make sure the council understands that. That's great, great improvement.
So I have a minor comment, right? So the city has to balance its budget anyway, there's no choice, right? So where, and I probably misunderstood this as well, where we talk about while the budget is balanced, it's important to understand that this is only because it really what that money is doing is maintaining services. It's not, you know, it's not like we would be bankrupt, we would have to just reduce services. So
Or staff.
or
You know,
either,
yeah,
either
exactly.
way, this money allows the city to maintain a high standard of services.
Exactly.
So
Do you think it would be better to say that, because of this, or something to the text to the effect of, because of this money, we're able to maintain the services as opposed to, balancing the budget?
Yeah, I think that's good language where
I-
you
yeah.
say something along those lines, that due to the federal funding, the city of Poway was able to quickly recover from the impacts of the COVID-19 recession without having to discount the services provided to the community.
I think
Yeah, Peter, I think the way you phrased that, it's just important that for the council and the mayor to understand that, yeah, services are maintained, that we would have less people working for the public if,
that's right.
if not for this money. So I think
Right.
that,
yeah, I
It's
think
good.
that this eliminates or reduces the impact of reduced expenditures on services or something. I think Peter said it better than I did, actually. But I think the per-tone balanced budget is probably not appropriate because cities have to have a balanced budget.
We should
yeah,
find
I
the
do think
recording.
what's that?
We should find the recording and then, whatever, and just go over it.
I think I mean, I feel that it's important to state that while the budget is balanced, because I mean, that's a fact, it's balanced,
Right.
we're not spending more than we're gonna have.
It's done without a reduction in services and amenities due to the,
Yeah,
That's beautiful. Love it.
okay.
great.
Print
Second,
that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll make that change and incorporate that language into that section. That's great, thank you. Also wanted to just point out, let's see, 1 second here.
One of the things that I changed was, when you talk about a summary of Poway's fiscal year 21 to 22 proposed budget, and then underneath you put overview. I designated this as a general fund overview, because a lot of the detail that you had pushed in there is different than if you look at the operating expenses budget or some of these other budgets that are provided, or different funds. And so I was just being more specific.
Would you also recommend on page 2 that we say general fund expenditures? Although, I would argue that.
But the expenditures overview is not all general
Yeah.
fund expenditures.
Right. Yeah, that's a great change, so I'll change it to, instead of overview, I'll say general fund overview.
Yeah, and Daniel was making a point about the headings and the subheadings. I'm kind of super anal that way as well, and it would be good if it was clear what was a main heading and what was a subheading. That was the point you were trying to make.
Yeah, so like if you see on, what I did on page 3, where you wrote specific items to note, it seems like those things underneath specific items to note, because you had the semicolon, that those items were then subtitles, not headings. And so I just spaced it over
You
to
put
make
it-
that
yeah.
kind of clear that these were specific items to note. Or you could, I don't know, change, instead of bold it, change it to, I don't know.
But you indented it, that was
I
fine.
indented it, that was
Yeah.
just like my way of the formatting adjustment.
Yeah.
Would the committee like to see it indented like that?
I think it would be more readable because,
Great.
you know, I would normally go with the big bits, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Right,
And then the indented pieces, A, B, C.
and also
But
too,
that's
like you would,
probably too anal.
like when you see with, you know, legislation where they're putting, you know, this is one,
Yeah.
you know, Roman numeral, yada, yada.
Great, I'll indent those.
It's trivial though, it's not.
Okay. Actually, I have a couple of, they're minor changes when I was, when they're under the Development Services Department. There's a section on the third line, near the right-hand side where it says undertaken to increase permitted throughput. That I think should be permitting.
It would be, really helpful if, for anyone, if they're referencing a document, just say which document it is,
My
which page you're
apologies,
looking
you're
at.
absolutely right. Document A.
Thank you.
Document A, development, page 3, under Development Services Department, third
Okay.
line down, near the right-hand side, it says, taken to increase permitted throughput. I think it should say, permitting,
Yeah,
like permitting throughput.
I thought it was throughout. Is that
Uh,
throughput or throughout?
It's throughput, so the
Yeah,
concept
tone it
being
down
that,
faster.
you know, you have higher, or shorter turnaround
yeah.
time on each project, so you can get more done.
Okay, great, permitting.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna remove taken, because it says undertaken, and then followed by
So
taken.
we are on, page
You're
3
right, right.
of document A. Am I to assume then that we're done discussing page 1 and 2? And if we're not, then I suggest we
Go back.
go in order
I apologize.
and
That's a good
kind of
idea.
finish each page?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
I think-
perfect.
Sure.
As a general thing, just want to say, I actually commend Danielle, on the very detailed, work you've done here. I do remember when I first started the Budget Review Committee, you know, we had a folder that was, I think a 5-inch binder. And it's much nicer that it's a 1-inch binder now. And we had all these details, you know, where basically it was like a fire hose flooding us.
Right.
And it was really important, I think, then and now, at least in the document, to summarize at a high level, what the gist of the budget is talking about in layman's terms, and to highlight a few key points for the council to focus on. And when I look at document A and the document, the document that you edited, I can see there's an enormous amount of overlap between what we're talking about. I think that's great, because I think it means that
Right.
in many respects that we're all seeing the same thing.
Right.
Here. But one thing I did see that was, actually, that's going to be development services, so we'll go through the rest of it, but there's one part that I wanted to highlight when we get down to it, and I'll talk about that when we get to that page. But I just wanted to say thank you for that, and for the work you've done here.
Yeah, I mean, I really did follow, the draft, and then I just edited a lot of the things that I felt was important. In my opinion, especially when you talk about personnel costs, I thought it was a little redundant that we discussed it twice. But if we're talking high level, when we're talking about the budget, I mean, it's money in the door, money out the door. And if we have less money coming in the door, then we need less money going out the door. Except we have, things that are out of our control, which the majority of personnel costs are out of the city's control. But the things that are a huge problem on the budget, in my opinion, is the water issues. Because that is a large outlay. Whether we have control to change that or not, that was kind of the 2 cents that I really added.
So the water and sewer systems are basically, their budgets are like encapsulated by, what people pay in fees.
Right.
And they are obviously very large expenditures that we have to undertake.
Right.
Because of the improvements that are, effectively we have to make to our water system.
Right.
And in my past experience, the city has never shied away from maintaining the water system and the sewer system to be, well above federal minimums, and it's a very high quality water system. And I think this is just part of the price we have to pay in order to maintain that level of quality.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so do we want to go over?
Well, one thing I just wanted to address is that we've talked a lot over the course of these 4 meetings and for the last few BRCs about how pension costs are out of the city's control. But I think it is important just to remember
Continue to beat
that.
the drum.
Well, no, I actually think that it's important to note that the majority of the personnel costs are within the city's control. Pay and healthcare
Absolutely.
are within the city's control. Now, obviously, we have to always keep in mind recruitment and retention, and those are very real concerns. But with all the talk of pensions and how that is out of the city's control largely, it's just important to just note that most of it's within the city's control.
That's a good point. That's a good point. So I think there is a fair amount the city can do, and I do think it's important to, in some respects, hammer that in with the document here. And I think we're doing a good job of that.
So, with your comments, Danielle, if we have any specific things that we want changed, please let me know. Or if there's any paragraph or sentence or anything that we absolutely want added, or for any of you, if there was an edit where you said, this was changed or modified or anything, please let me know and we can modify that. I think we've all looked at page 1. Do we want to move on to page 2 and see if there's any? Okay.
So are we saying we're all in agreement on page 1? Which
Yeah.
version of page 1?
I was thinking version A.
Version A?
Well, why don't we go to page 2 of version A, and and move through that. And then see if there's any changes, that page at a time. I think we'll be able to get through this.
So just so I understand, we're saying, draft A, page 1, we're all in agreement on that wording? Is that what we're saying?
With the, modification that at the bottom, under overview, I'm going to,
Right,
say general fund overview, and I will modify the 9.3 million in stimulus dollars, change that to 4.65 million in this fiscal year, or in this budget, and clarify that this allows us to maintain services as normal. So
Okay.
I'll make those edits, and if there's nothing else on page 1, then we'll move on.
no, that's fine with me.
Great.
Mhm.
Good point, Bob. Okay,
Page 2.
So I guess I'm not on page 2, but you know, in the summary of Poway's fiscal year 21 to 22 proposed budget, you know, the
what page is this?
sentencing,
Page 1 again.
page 1 on A and D. So that's what I was talking about, is the high-level differences that I brought up, that, I talked about the restraints of which the city operates. The BRC notes that the Poway staff and elected officials continue to make concerted efforts to be mindful of revenues and expenditures. I don't want it to seem like all we're doing is being critical of staff and their hard work, or even elected officials and some of the constraints that they're within. But, you know, the personnel costs and talking about higher CalPERS, law enforcement and the sheriff's department, if you really look at the numbers at a percentage basis, to me, those aren't like the big ticket items. And so I just made the change, you know, I used your language commending the city, the future, and then talking about, commending the city I wrote, we commend the city for having the foresight to alleviate upcoming budgetary problems by looking for ways to increase city revenues in the coming years with the continued development of storefronts and housing projects throughout the city. These future property tax and sales tax revenue increases appear to alleviate future general fund deficits. I don't know if that even, you know, should be there, but I think, you know, part of the issue is we do have some of these continued problems, but the city in previous years and this year has made changes to increase some of those sales tax and property tax revenues with the development. And then I put, however, rising personnel costs, problems with the water fund, and community improvement project expenses, among many other items across the spectrum of city services, continue to have ongoing budgetary issues. Added pressures the city faces during times of recessions do not alleviate these glaring / many issues. So part of me was trying to keep it high level and not getting into the grit of specific items like CalPERS or the sheriff, or I don't know if that's.
I think I added sheriff's department because it was someone else's recommended edit to that, and I think it's a good one.
Which, you know, we could put in a list of things of increases.
I think, the way the way it's put together in A, is, and in particular at this point in the document, it gives the appropriate number of hints as to what we're talking about, and it stays general enough to be at this particular point in the document. I think we do go into some more of the details later on, as you know, drilling down into development services department, and you know, some issue about the fire department, that type of stuff. But I think that we probably don't want to get too detailed too quickly.
So in the interest of being respectful of everyone's time, I think the best way to handle this would be if there is a specific something you want added, anyone, go ahead and throw it out and say, you know, I would like to see this and give me the exact language, because that would be really helpful, to ask that that be included, or omitted, and then we can, get consensus amongst the committee. That would be the most helpful thing, I think.
I agree, you're right. We, otherwise, this really, yeah, I think we should do that.
So let's go page by page, and if there's something very specific that we want added or omitted, then we can discuss something specific like that, if that sounds good with everyone. So on this, Danielle, how, I'll defer to the committee on what we want to do with page 1.
I personally agree with what Peter just said. I think page 1 is appropriate now.
And I think if it's appropriate, then we just have to adjust the language on paragraph 1 under summary of Poway's fiscal year. I just don't like the way that last sentence, these personnel cost increases manifest in everything from higher CalPERS billed to higher for the law enforcement contract. It's a run-on sentence with many problems. So
I actually agree with some of the stuff that Danielle says, which is more of a broad brush, because the specifics come up later in the document.
that's my point, yeah.
And I think there's a way, not necessarily to soften what's put there, but I think what Danielle's written is just, don't want to be nasty, but it's a bit too long.
So how about we just
If you could knock
scratch
that
that
down to
second,
a couple of sentences.
let's just take out that second sentence. So under a summary of Poway's FY22 proposed budget, we'll just have that first sentence, despite being a generally well governed, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
And I'll just cut these personnel costs. We've talked, you guys make a great point. We talk about personnel costs later on, so we'll just drop that
Right.
from this intro. That's great.
Okay.
But I think
agree.
Danielle had some good comments. If that could just be a couple of, maybe one sentence to sort of, here's a heads up. Things on the horizon look a little bit problematic.
Or maybe that's what we do, is we slash that more detailed sentence like you're recommending, and then when we get into the subheadings of specific issues later, then you get the specifics.
Yeah. Because the summary is really just setting the stage for the rest of it.
Right. I think so.
Yeah.
So is that a request to incorporate part of your paragraph into document A? And which part would you like to incorporate?
No, I think what we do is we keep sentence 1 and either alter sentence 2 or slash sentence 2.
So we'll slash sentence 2.
Keep it simple.
Yeah, that's great. If we want to add anything else from document D, then this would be.
I also put in the simply put, which I love, I put the cost of operating the city are not keeping pace with the anticipated revenues. And then you could put period.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah. That's
Because
good.
again, in my opinion, this is anticipated, these are projections, these aren't actual.
I appreciate that, but I would actually argue that they're not at this particular moment in time.
Oh, okay.
Given that we're balancing the budget, in part because of stimulus dollars.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know, I think that this is, my intent with this was to give a really good, clear warning to the mayor and council that,
Okay.
there are budgetary problems. But,
I agree with your counterpart.
okay.
I'm done.
Any other thoughts on page 1? Okay, we'll move on to page 2.
And just my question for like the overview, is that gonna be underlined? Is that a subheading? I was just trying to follow like how you structured the readability, and whatever you're structuring it, I'm good with. I just didn't know if that was a subheading under the summary of the proposed budget, or if that's like a separate heading.
Well, remembering that we're gonna change it to general fund overview.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So part of my edits in the general fund overview was that I really love the way that the budget reads, and I really love the added descriptions that were put in the budget. And so I think you had added that in your section in the second to last paragraph of overview, and I just brought it to the front so that as the reader is looking at this, it's setting the stage as the
Great.
general fund states.
Yeah, so I like that. I put that in there specifically for the, average member of the public
Right.
who can understand what a general fund even is. So if that sounds good with everyone, I'm gonna take on page 2 of document A, the third paragraph, as the budget states, I'm gonna take that whole paragraph and move it to the beginning of this section, back on page 1, under general fund.
Okay.
review.
Okay.
Great. Anything else on page 2?
So I also changed, on paragraph 1, so if that's now gonna be paragraph 2, I kept everything the same in the current proposed budget. I just changed it. General fund revenue for fiscal year 21 to 22 is forecasted to be 55 million. And instead of saying up from an estimated, I just said, which is an increase from the fiscal year 20 to 21 estimated 52.6 million received in revenues.
Can you say that one more time, so I can make sure I got it right?
It's exactly what's in D.
Oh,
So I just changed up from an estimated, changed the language to, which is an increase from fiscal year. So
Okay.
what is it up from? Is it up from 2 years ago, 1 year ago? But just using the increase
Okay.
language.
so if it's good with everyone, I'll take that sentence on page 2 of document D, general fund revenue for FY 21 through 22 is forecasted. That whole sentence in paragraph 3, I'm gonna put that into document A. That's great.
Okay.
Okay, so we're on page 2, right?
Right, above.
So on the second paragraph starts with because, which is grammatically incorrect, really. It should, I would put due to dramatic cutbacks, since, because there's a conjunction, it shouldn't start a sentence with because.
Okay, we'll make that's a great change, thank you. Due to dramatic cutbacks on spending.
So when I write personal financial plan letters for clients, I normally try to keep, each data point structure the same. And so I really pushed a lot of the things that I use for clients in the way that I wrote it. And so I essentially said, this is the general fund revenue. It's increased to 52 million, but what is it increasing? 2.4 million, okay? And then the balance at the beginning of fiscal year 21-22 is anticipated at 3.5, which then provides an anticipated total funds available of 68 million. So just kind of breaking down the basics of the general fund overview page in language that's readable. I don't know if that's necessary to go further into that detail. And then due to the conservative projections of revenue in 2021, the city is expected to have an increase in estimated general fund revenues of 4.8 million. So if you look at the budget from the actual, the budget 2021 and the estimated 2021, it was a big increase from where it kind of landed. And part of my question was, is this the federal funding money and also the budget cuts? And that was answered earlier tonight. So maybe we slash that item. But then the next section, the next paragraph, I do expenditures. So it's paragraph 1 is revenue, money coming in the door. Paragraph 2 is expenditures, money going out the door. So if we're gonna compare last year's budget to this year's budget, what trends are we seeing? That's kind of
My
where
only
I
concern
spent
with
a lot of
that-
my time.
So, actually, now that you've explained in that third paragraph on page 2, where I said I'd take the first sentence from that, how about that whole paragraph? So that, I think that's a positive thing for the council to to see that, the total funds available is 68.8 million,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. So how about I take that whole paragraph, if it's good with the committee, take that whole paragraph and, just incorporate it into the document. On the next paragraph regarding general fund expenditures, my only concern would be that the next whole big section down here at the bottom of the page is about expenditures, so.
I know that, and I didn't know, it's because we're discussing general fund versus overall expenditures. And so that's why the next section, I called it expenditures overview, because then we go into the weeds about other funds. Or am I just like being like super? Because there are, like, it's one thing if you're talking about the fire fund or the sheriff's budget or the general fund, there's
Yeah.
16 different types of budgets that we're looking at. And so from my perspective, this is the general fund.
Right.
And then here's the other expenditures and here's the other revenues.
I'll just say that I structured it on that initial draft presented last week, structured it intentionally to be as easily digestible for the
Right.
average person as possible. And you have some, great
Detail.
recommendations here.
And I was worried as I was writing it, and the people's eyes are glazing over.
Well, I would just, it's whatever kind of memo we want,
Right.
As a BRC, do we want to go into that kind of detail, or do we want to keep it, the most easily understandable and digestible document for the public as possible? So that's kind of our options here.
So,
And Mr. Chair, if I may, real quick, I'm sorry, Peter. Just to remind you who the real audience is for this, you are sending this to the mayor and council.
Right.
And they have a general understanding of the budget as well, and they've been through briefings just like you, or they will.
So we don't have to get in the nitty gritty.
So I don't, in my opinion, no, it's your, I'm not trying to steer you.
No, I
away from
don't care.
anything, but I don't think that they need and are looking for that level of detail.
Okay.
Now, granted, the community will read this as well,
Right.
but this isn't their only opportunity to learn about the budget. So, I think whatever that magic sweet spot is, of the right amount of detail to demonstrate your understanding of the budget, and share your thoughts about it, without getting into too much detail, because nobody wants to lose their audience, right? And the
True.
more they get into these things, in the realm of our budget, right? We snarked it down from that 748 pages to, from the 5-inch binder to the 1-inch binder. It's
Right.
much more digestible.
Absolutely.
Perhaps you should be thinking that way as well as you put this memo together.
yeah.
I agree.
That's an excellent point. I think we need to be mindful that this document we're preparing is going to the council. And yes, it will be read by the public, but like you said, there'll be other ways for them to learn about the budget.
Particularly because they can download it, and it'll be a subset of people who want to do that. And, but we don't want to lose the people who are not going to go to that level of detail, don't want to. And if we start throwing out lots and lots of numbers, that's a quick way
To lose.
to turn people off, and then they're just gonna miss all the points.
But I also look at it from the perspective of when I'm giving an opinion or a recommendation, this is the foundation and laying the stage for it,
Mhm.
right? And I'm a numbers person, so I'm gonna defer to being in the sweet spot, as you say. But I think, there has to be a little bit of the overview. Maybe we don't need as much of the detail that I provided. Maybe we do general fund revenues, that second paragraph in the D, use sentence 1, also use sentence 2, and then slash anything after that. And then paragraph 2, general fund expenditures, what they're budgeted, which is also an increase. And whatever you guys feel is necessary.
Okay, so just, if we do take that by verbatim, it actually would be retrenchment efforts, not retrenched efforts. Oh, no, from the my apologies.
So the public has access to the budget anyway, right?
Right.
Okay, so My take on this is that the comments in this should be directionally correct, and they should be able to inform somebody that doesn't want to see all the numbers, what the state of the city's finances are, and they should come away with the message that this is how it looks, these are where the issues are, this is what we think needs to be done. And then for those that are interested, they can actually drill into the numbers. And I would see this document, and correct me if I'm wrong, as a way to point people in the direction they would want to go. If they really want to know, well, what are the expenditures or what is happening to the general fund? That information's in the public domain. But it's our job to inform people this is the state of the general fund to make sure that our comments are directionally correct, that there are concerns over this, this, and this, without necessarily bombarding folks with numbers, because those that are interested can actually go and get those numbers from the city's webpage.
So given that, document A is the most, I think, cut to the chase version of that.
I think it should be quite terse, to be honest, because you want people to read it.
What does terse mean?
Minimize the amount of verbiage.
Gotcha.
Just so
Cut to the chase.
So as you can read it and you can say, oh, wait a minute, there is a concern here, or yeah, that looks okay, it makes sense.
Right.
So given that, do we want to leave paragraph 2, as an example, leave paragraph 2 as is, with the exception of?
We're on page 2 expenditures, is that paragraph 2?
For D or A?
Well, that's what I'm asking. On page 2 of document A, we talked about initially, changing because of to due to, and then we talked about adding one sentence, and then we talked about basically the whole paragraph. So what do we want to do with
Paragraph 2 and
yeah,
A.
paragraph 2 and
Okay.
A. What would you guys like to do?
Gotcha.
Do we want to incorporate the more detailed version that Danielle has proposed, or do we want to keep it?
I'm fine with the way it is in the document now.
Just change due to dramatic cutbacks.
I'll change that.
Yeah.
And also, just as a reminder, I'm going to move
Yeah,
paragraph 3 up to the front of this
Yes,
section.
agreed.
that was a good call, yeah.
I do think that if we're gonna go with that paragraph, then just like kind of tighten up sentence 1 of paragraph 2 in A, because it is a long sentence. I think the whole paragraph is a sentence. So due to the dramatic cutbacks on spending under retrenchment, and again, is the fiscal year 21, is that 20 to 21 or 21 to 22?
Actually, Aaron, I'd love your thoughts on the proper way. I've worked at agencies where they kind of shorthand referred to fiscal year 2020 to 2021 as FY 21. I've also, how should it be referred to in this document?
So yes, it's kind of a, agency's personal preference. The way we have structured it throughout the document, if you look at the schedules, is a 4-digit first year, 2-digit end year with a dash in between. So it'd be, either FY, 2021-22, or fiscal year 2021-22. I tend to go with FY, to shorten that up with the 4-digit first year, 2-digit second year.
Okay, then we'll keep that consistent, and I think that allows the public to understand what we're talking about. So I will switch out, if it's good with the committee, where I say FY 22 through, or FY 21 throughout, we will make it, instead of FY 22, it'll be FY 2021-22. And when we're talking about FY 22,
21,
the upcoming
yeah.
budget, we'll refer to that as FY 2021 through 22.
Yeah. I think
Yeah. So like in the paragraph 2, we'll make that adjustment.
Yeah.
And then the city is expected to have an increase in balance fund. And then from 8.6 last year to an estimated 3.5 at the end of fiscal year in June, semicolon, it's just, that whole sentence needs to be tightened up, and however that happens.
Just put a period instead of semicolon.
Yeah, it's like
Okay.
it's like Hemingway wrote it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, if
Maybe
it's Hemingway,
But
this
then
would be done in a
this is
page.
largely due to the,
Okay, I will make that change. I'll remove the semicolon and make it a
Period.
its own sentence. That sounds great.
perfect.
All right, other thoughts on page 2?
And then you just discussed the non-general fund operating budget, which I think is good to add.
Great.
But I just didn't know if the numbers were accurate. Because I didn't see what page in the actual budget you were talking about.
Aaron, if, on page 2, document A, paragraph 4, where I say the city's non-general fund operating budget is almost 47 million. The capital budget includes 16 million in new requests, $500,000 of that is related to general fund projects. Can you confirm that that's accurate?
Aaron, before you, why don't I say this?
Sure.
Once you're all finished what you're doing, give us a draft of that, and we will double check all the numbers to make sure they're accurate
I
and
love
they align with the
Yeah.
budget. So
Okay.
we'll take that look at it. So
Okay.
you don't need to spend time on
On
that
the
right
math?
now today,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Good to
Yeah,
know,
great.
thank you.
All right.
Anything in the expenditures section? I just wanted to note, before we move on from this, that under the expenditure section in paragraph 2, middle of it, one area that could be addressed by the city council in the future is employee compensation. I just wanted to note that, I think it was Nick, maybe you had a comment there, because I'd initially written that as like in next, I said in the future, because I think that's something that the city should always be, looking at as far as, employee compensation and how that plays into the budget. So I just changed it to the future.
So I had one minor point, is
Yeah.
that in paragraph 1 of expenditures, you talk about CalPERS,
Mhm.
and then in paragraph 2, you actually define CalPERS. You should,
Oh, thank you.
yeah, I would put the full, in paragraph 1, have the whole sentence.
Yeah,
and then-
absolutely.
Yeah.
And a minor thing in paragraph 2 of expenditures, actually where it does say one area that could, maybe just make that its own paragraph.
Okay.
Because it's otherwise pretty long.
Where's that, what are you discussing?
So 6 lines up from the
in
bottom.
section A, document A, expenditures, second paragraph, near the bottom of that second paragraph under expenditures, it says one area that could be addressed by the city council in the future.
Perfect.
And just, I figure that could be that could be the start of the paragraph.
Great.
Is could in italics deliberately, or is that,
The could,
yeah,
yeah, I think so. I think
Leave
it
it in
looks
it.
good.
okay, italicize it.
Okay.
So I didn't like that in the A document, second paragraph of expenditures, driven largely by CalPERS, which manages the defined benefit pension plan, because it isn't true. So if you look at the personnel costs and the issues with personnel costs, obviously the pension plan is an issue, but it's not the largest issue, in my opinion.
My intent there was that the PERS payment has risen faster
Right.
than any other element of compensation. So I
Right.
think that was my intent.
Yeah. And so I wrote in my section on D, I said, at the city of Poway, ever-rising personnel costs are the largest contributing factor to the city's operating budget for a total of 35 million. As the city expands services to the community, the staffing necessary to accommodate services are necessary. That might be a little redundant. However, the cost to run Poway continues to outpace standard inflation increase. Many of these increased personnel items are completely out of the control of city staff and elected officials like CalPERS. And then I put CalPERS manages the defined benefit pension plans of all city employees, and this expenditure is mandated by state, or whatever language. Because, you know, at the end of the day, there's nothing we can do. We can highlight the fact that this is a CalPERS expenditure, but there's going to be no recommendation to city council or anything that can, so we're just highlighting a problem and continuing to highlight that problem, but there's no solution to that problem. I do like your language about tier 2 from the classic. I didn't like the language which you see in my section D, where I had the red crossed out. The city council has done a good job in attempting to control these costs. I just put, we commend previous actions by city leadership to adopt early pension reform efforts, including establishing a tier 2 for classic members that decreases the city's annual liability, period, cross out the rest.
Aaron, I would like to hear your comment on Danielle's statement that it's not true that rising personnel costs are not driven largely by CalPERS. We had no salary increases last year, so if personnel costs went up, it'd either be CalPERS or new hires.
No, they went up because there was unfunded positions that are now projected to be funded. So that's really the only, from my notes and what we discussed.
So CalPERS costs went up, I believe, I'd have to double check it. I think it was $600,000 or $700,000 they added to this coming year's budget. Unfunding or refunding the unfunded positions added, I think around $400,000. So CalPERS was definitely a
Factor?
contributing factor.
Okay.
Yeah. While you guys continue discussing, I'll try and find a document or the last presentation to bring that up.
So on page 28 of the actual budget, which is the operating budget, where it shows the personnel subtotal, I think then I stand corrected that the retirement benefit went from 7 million to 8.1. But I was looking at it of the 35 million in personnel expenses, 8 million is pension. The rest is salaries, healthcare, and miscellaneous expenses.
Yeah, so maybe what's going on here is just a perspective difference,
Right.
where one is percentage of whole and the other is a rate of change.
Right. Perfect way of putting it, Aaron.
And if I could just say one thing on this, you bring up a great point about, you know, there's nothing we can do about pensions, and why
Right.
even bother talking about it? And I think that it is such a hugely important part of our city's budget, and it affects everything. I mean, we are able to pave less roads, we are able to have less services and less employees because the pension costs are so high. And so I just, you know, I know the mayor and council get that largely, but certainly any member of the public who reads this needs to understand that. And also, you know, I don't know about you guys, but when I joined BRC, I looked at the last couple of years of BRC memos, and so I think it's important even for the next BRC and future BRCs and you know, any member of the public that reads this to understand that. I just think it's really, really important to address it. And I would just say one other thing, which is, and we haven't really gotten into this, but I would encourage, and maybe this is just goes without saying, but I think it's important that the city always be thinking creatively and always be looking at any possible way that they can address those pension costs. And I know that other cities have attempted, you know, or you've explained how you looked at the cost of actually exiting the system and all that, and I would just encourage the city to always be thinking about that and monitoring what's going on in the legal realm and state legislation and all of that, because if there's ever any way to get out of this situation or even make it a little bit better, it would be a really good thing for the taxpayers of Poway.
And I guess my language I was trying to get across is, the city can't control the liability required by the state for the pension, but they can control the staff that is hired, that receives those benefits as we acquire new staff. And so I was looking at it from that perspective of, when we're looking at a $35 million personnel expenditure, 8 of which is the pension, if you hire 4, 5, 10 new people, you are then going to increase those pension expenditures that, again, are outside the control. And I went back and looked at the 2008, 2009 budgets during the financial crisis, and, you know, not that I'm saying we should be getting rid of services and people, but I mean, that is the largest expenditure, and if we can't change the pension, then what do? We change the salaries, the healthcare, or the people that are working, period.
Yeah, and I think, when document A, when it does talk about the CalPERS as driving a lot of these costs, it's in part because these are incredibly long-term costs.
Right.
That continue to follow the city, and I think it's important that the council not lose that reminder that this is really like the elephant in the room. That, I mean, not talking about it isn't going to make it go away, and it's also going to it's going to make it easier to make mistakes if you ignore this particular problem. And so I think it's very important that we continue to hammer this, that it stays in the recommendation document that we have here as such, so that future BRCs are aware of this history, that it didn't just suddenly go away. So I'm okay with what we have here in respects to that.
Just to clarify, Bob, your previous question, so retirement was slightly over $500,000. Funding the unfunded positions was about $350,000.
Thank you.
So I think the best, sorry to
Yeah.
prolong this, but I think the best message here is to indicate in a factual way what the situation is like. And maybe do that in terms of, I don't want to change the document dramatically, but, you know, what is the percentage? Because people understand the percentage.
Right.
If they get a 10% raise, they know what it is, but they also would know if we're increasing the expenditure on these benefits by 10%, they're kind of going to understand what that is as well.
I agree.
And I don't want to belittle, to patronize people, but actual numbers might not make as much sense as a percentage, right?
Yeah, so just so I'm understanding correctly, you would like in this.
Well, I'm just trying to think, well, what is the best way for somebody to understand it? And it's, the way I look at it, and my number might be wrong, but it's something like 54% of the town's expenditure is on OPEX. And it's increasing.
Yeah, so would it be helpful if we, in this section, just laid out that personnel costs are X percentage of the budget, and of that, pension costs are X percent of personnel costs?
Yeah, something like,
Yeah.
and maybe some sort of remark just to imply what that is year over year.
So I think that does change, though, depending on the market conditions for how CalPERS is, what the return is, because they make up the difference, if I recall.
Yeah,
We
so.
make up the difference, I'm sorry.
No, that's a astute point. You will see fluctuations in retirement costs, right, as a result of,
Okay.
what you just brought up, Peter. Over time, the trend will be upwards. But it's just kind of like the stock market, right, where you have the ups and downs, but overall it tends to go up. That's what we're experiencing with CalPERS right now. And again, I think I brought this up during the first BRC with the long-range forecast. Their rates are projected to peak in another few years.
Right.
Now, that doesn't necessarily translate to the dollar payments we're making them. That may lag a bit, but, pension reform, is starting to top out, and we should see some relief thereafter.
Okay, so, here's what I have right now on edits for the expenditure section. I'm going to, modify how CalPERS is presented and spelled out and all that stuff. And I'm gonna drop that third paragraph where it says one area that could be addressed, so.
You're gonna drop that, or you're gonna make it a separate
I'm
paragraph?
gonna make it, I'm
Okay.
gonna make it, drop
Okay.
it down, make it its own
New
paragraph.
yeah,
Yes.
new paragraph.
If there are any other specific
No,
changes that the committee wants, please state
I
it
have
now, or
none.
we'll move on.
I have none.
Okay. All right, moving on to specific items of note. Let's just, move through that. If there's nothing left on page 2, because that's just kind of the preamble there, we can move on to page 3.
So this is where I kind of feel it's redundant.
I would
Because
agree, yeah, we're talking about personnel
We're
costs
talking
again.
about personnel costs in expenditure overview, and then you go in specific items to note. And then I just put a title on it in my section, but I didn't really
I'll make it,
change.
I agree completely, let's just drop the personnel costs as its own
Okay,
issue,
Yeah.
because we dive into it earlier on.
sounds good.
Yeah.
Great.
One thing that I did add though, or no, you have that, never mind. I do like that section that you put, while CalPERS, the city's contracted retirement provider, is outside of the city council's control and is in desperate need for reform by California state legislators, salaries, health insurance, and other benefits are negotiated by the city. We encourage management to negotiate the most cost-effective salary and benefit structure for the taxpayers. I say we add that
Can we just move it up into
Yeah,
the?
move it
and
up,
move
yeah.
it up
Yeah.
Yeah,
to the expenditure section where
Yeah.
you're talking about CalPERS, and then you just get rid of everything else.
That's
That would
great.
work.
Yeah, that is a good,
I would agree.
an important point for the,
yeah, you may have to clean up that paragraph that you dropped, right, one area, et cetera, because
yeah, I'll do that.
it looks as though some of the stuff is repeated, but it makes sense
Right,
to
but clean it
merge
up,
'em.
and again, just kind of housing the structure in the same
Yeah.
area.
I think that's great.
That's good, really good recommendation.
And so then the next is revenue growth.
So you say in the second sentence, continuation of redevelopment, some of it's actually just development, right? It's not.
Yeah, well, I don't know, I mean, I
It's
think
kind of
every.
both, right? We're tearing down some things and redeveloping, and then in other parts of the town, it's development.
Yeah, I think I used the term redevelopment, small R redevelopment, in this case, to make clear that, yeah, we're talking about, properties that have already previously had something.
So you're talking about upgrading, basically.
Yeah, that was the intent. I mean,
Okay.
I don't think we're,
Okay.
developing any new areas.
So maybe we say, like, so we're talking about revenue growth, so you say revenue increase should be accomplished primarily through increasing the size of the property base, and then say something versus, what is it?
Rather than increasing the tax rate.
Right.
Yeah.
Versus increasing the tax rate. So it just focuses on how do we increase these revenues without bleeding the people that are paying the revenues dry? Like, what are new income streams?
I like that, clarification.
Yeah.
And then you wrote, this type of revenue generation without tax increases can only occur through a continuation of redevelopment in areas where it is currently permitted, and by encouraging and streamlining the ability of Poway residents to improve their own properties. I like that.
Would you recommend that the city expand the opportunities for development as well?
I don't know if we want to wade into that discussion. I think, as a budget review committee, I think we want to stay focused on.
That's like the third rail.
Right.
Right. One sentence that I put in my section, which is sentence 2 of the revenue growth, I put, by continuing to develop new housing and retail projects throughout the city, these future property tax and sales tax revenue increases appear to alleviate future general fund deficits. Which, if you look at the projections, because they anticipate increases in, 3 to 5 years. So I think maybe saying something along those lines is,
I'm a little uncomfortable with that.
okay. I'm okay with deleting it then.
Any thoughts on Development Services Department?
Sorry,
Yeah.
the paragraph that starts with additionally at the bottom there. Fourth line down, it says, the city council and upper management, A, just cross out the A. Because A and metrics don't work,
Got it.
just very minor.
You sure?
Maybe it was a minor.
I think that was your
So is this
language.
Development Services Department going to be a subheading of specific items to note? Or is it going to be
Yeah.
its own
No,
new section?
All of this is specific items to note. Yeah, just to be really clear on that. I
Okay,
mean, the big picture stuff at the beginning of this whole document is, the
General.
intro, the summary of the budget being the general fund overview and the expenditures, and that's, and then everything after that is essentially a specific item that we just want to highlight, one of which being the Development Services Department.
And this may be helpful, I think I'm newer to this process as well. One thing that I've looked at that specific section as is kind of the, recommendations, like that's the actual, here's what we think, yeah. So like when I, went over during, last meeting, here's what BRC recommended last year, those were lifted right off of this section here.
right.
So are we on the last paragraph of this, page 3?
Yeah.
So, I missed, I didn't hear what Peter said because his microphone was off at that point, but about, the first sentence talks about metrics and the second sentence is high-level KPIs.
So it's key performance indicator.
Yeah, I figured that. I wondered if we needed to spell that out.
Yeah.
I think it's always good to spell it out and then
Okay.
in parentheses put KPI or,
Yeah, well, we only use it
Do
once,
once, so
so
just
you
Right.
just call it, yeah, I
Okay.
would spell it out.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I didn't hear what you said, that was the problem.
Mr. Chair, if I may get out of my lane here just a little bit, I apologize.
Sure.
The second sentence, and this semantics nuance perhaps, it references, unlike in other municipalities, this department operates at a deficit.
is that true?
I'm not aware of any municipality that doesn't have a department that operates at a deficit. Now,
What about City of San Diego?
so there's direct cost recovery and indirect cost recovery, and that's where I said the nuances in there. I don't believe San Diego operates at a full cost recovery either. I understand what the sentence means here and the idea behind it, but I don't think that is the factually correct statement, and that'd be.
You might have meant, Peter, that they have a policy of,
I was looking at their, some documents where they actually did run at a deficit for a while. They were, well, at least according to the documents, they were running, above it, they were running more than better than cost neutral, then they dropped below, made some changes, and then came back. But at the same time, I don't know enough about the differences between City of San Diego, the City of Poway, what's really included in the department. So, you know, it could be an apples to oranges comparison here. But I just, you know, I put that in. I'm okay if we remove it.
Yeah.
I would like, you know, on all, you know, funds and all expenditures, actually get as close to zero as possible.
So I will remove at the first 4 words of that sentence, unlike in other municipalities. I'll just
Yeah,
scratch
okay.
that if you're good, and
Yeah,
this,
this department operates in it and should be under, yeah, okay.
Cool.
That's fine,
Thank you.
no problem.
Well, and I think the whole point is to achieve cost neutrality. So if we remove comparing us to other people, you know, the cost neutrality, I think is a good recommendation.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for pointing that out.
anything else on page 3?
So I just made a change to the first paragraph, and it's the second to last sentence in that first paragraph of DSD.
Oh.
The better the department gets at moving projects through the pipeline quickly, the more direct and recurring revenue city can take in. And I just put can generate, period, instead of take in.
That's fine.
So I have one comment. We talked about the deficit and the cost neutrality, right, at the beginning of the Development Services Department paragraph. Then in the final paragraph, which is actually on page 4, it kind of says the same thing. Move to ensure that, no, not outdoor dining. The goal of the suggestions is to achieve a DSD that operates in a cost-neutral fashion. So it kind of said that.
Yeah, let's just scratch that sentence.
You've already said that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good.
What do you mean, already said what?
Well, because when we rewrote the second sentence under Development Services Department, it was to push towards cost neutrality, right?
Right,
And then on page 4,
operate cost in neutral
it
fashion.
it says
Okay.
the same thing.
Yeah, I'll
And-
take out that sentence.
Also in that paragraph where you would talk about finally, the department should also quickly move to ensure that outdoor dining and other uses that have seen success over the last year remain a permanent option for Poway residents and businesses. I referenced in, mine
Yeah,
that, where is
Says
it? Like
like
the
this-
city of
yeah.
San Diego, it may be recommended to implement an automatic, oh, that's supposed to be an automatic extension of permits associated with the impacts of COVID-19 for an additional fiscal year. So a few days ago, they just automatically approved all the outdoor dining permitting. So I don't know if that should go in this section right there, or if that
That's
is
fine.
even
That
something to
seems
note.
sort of redundant as far as what's already there, right?
Mr. Chair, if I may clarify one thing?
Yeah.
So city council actually directed staff, a few months ago, I can't remember the exact month or date, to move toward, creating policy that allows the current outdoor dining operation to continue permanently.
Okay,
So perhaps something
Not
along the
redundant.
lines of this committee, supports the
Yeah.
recent council action to, make the outdoor dining permanent.
Yeah, I think that would be, you know, the
Good.
committee recommends, and right. The only thing that I wrote in my comments was that a lot of those outside dining things were done sort of in an emergency situation on the spur of the moment. And I would hate to see the city fall afoul of the ADA laws. I mean, I remember, you know, there's lawyers going around to places up in Julian and suing them because people with disabilities couldn't use the stores, and it's just a,
Yeah, good point. I think that's maybe
and I
beyond
think,
what we need to get into on.
I know, I was
Right.
just, you know, when they put these platforms for dining, I would say they're probably not ADA accessible, and that may cause the city some problems.
And that's why we'd be creating new policy to allow
Yeah.
it to be health and safety regulations, of
Okay.
course, included. So,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
point well taken.
I think we're on to page 4.
Yeah.
yeah.
So it seems like some of the PCPA stuff was probably answered at last night's council meeting, right? And I don't think we capture that. Do we need to?
We could,
Yeah, is there anything that, staff would recommend be incorporated or addressed in the memo, given?
I don't know that we need to add anything, because in the next fiscal year, I think probably what we'll get through is the feasibility study component. I don't think we'll see fruition on the endowment maybe later in next fiscal year, but the money we hopefully will be getting from the McCarthy Family Foundation is really just envisioned as seed money with the intention to grow a much larger endowment to really have significant spin-off on an annual basis to offset expenses. So I think this is probably good for this fiscal year, or this coming fiscal year, and then I think we'll have more to add to it as we get through all those action items that are mentioned here, and I talked a little about last week, if the committee's comfortable with that approach.
Okay.
okay.
Thanks. If there are no comments on PCPA, then we can move on to overtime.
I'm good with it.
I'm good with it.
Yeah.
Great. Page 5.
Did we miss overtime on page 4?
Yeah, I thought we,
Oh, we said it was okay.
We're good with, I'm
Nobody-
good with it.
nobody commented
Do you
that.
have
Okay.
anything to say?
Okay, I thought we were, okay.
Yeah, if you have anything on
No.
overtime, please feel free to.
I'm just a C student, I'm a little slow.
No, you're not.
I'll note that I added the BRC format paragraph to the end, per the recommendation, per the discussion last week.
Mhm.
So we just addressed that, since there was some comments about that.
I think that's important, given the sort of comments outside, and people presented on that as well.
Mhm.
And it makes perfect sense.
So one of the things that I thought was budget readability. I wonder if that should kind of go at the top, almost. Almost before we get into the weeds.
I'm fine with that. That is one of the main, I think, directives of this committee.
Right.
So, that sounds good to me. I'll move it to the beginning of,
You put that in the introduction then?
no, I'll put
Or
it at the beginning of, or I'll make it the first of the specific items of note.
Okay.
That'd be good.
That'll work.
One thing that I put in the readability section was just this one sentence in, paper D on page 4, budget readability, paragraph 1, last sentence. I said, utilization of descriptions or about sections attached to each fund section is very informative and an excellent addition to the proposed budget, which makes the budget more accessible and easier to understand. That's something that I added.
Looking at the budget, there's the about section at the bottom of,
Each page, that's what I'm talking about.
so what's the recommendation, or what's the request to include?
Well, so I was just saying that the utilization of these about sections attached to each fund, like, I commend them for adding that. Maybe that's something that they continue.
Okay, we'll just highlight.
Because I said it's informative and an excellent addition to the proposed budget.
Okay,
And you can say like overview section. About is a,
Well, it's called the about
so
section.
just so I'm clear, you're just commending staff for having that?
Including it, because like,
Okay.
for me, this is my first year
Yeah.
getting a deep dive into it. And I'm telling you, it just made it so much easier for me to understand, like I say, where the bodies are buried. I like to figure it all out, and I loved it. I really did.
Okay,
It's a
great.
good
I will
point, because you're
commend
coming
staff
at that
for
perspective.
a clear and concise about section.
Right.
Great. Anything else?
Are we at, like, the capital expenditures to reduce operating expenses? Did we go over that yet?
This would be the time to address that.
As I read it, one thing that I wanted to look at was the last sentence of that section, where I had kind of edited right here. Additionally, as California approaches state mandated requirements for electric vehicles, I don't know, is that truly state mandated? Has that legislation
Yeah,
been
it's
put
been-
into place?
Executive order by the governor?
I think it's
Personally?
2035, but is
Yeah.
it legislation or is it an executive order?
Executive
Okay.
order, yeah.
So I think that's good. The city should be planning now to transition. Instead of, planning now, I put, consider a long-term approach
Yeah.
to transition the fleet before every other agency in the state is forced to do the same.
We should just be proactive, I guess.
Yeah, like I was just saying, part of it was like, consider a long-term approach, like,
Yeah.
you know, let's have a long view on this.
So I'll say, the city should consider
A
A
long-term
long-term-
approach
approach,
and then just put that in between, like,
Okay,
to
great.
transition the fleet, and I think that would make it,
Yeah, my concern there is that if it does get hard, you know, if the law, if it becomes the law, then everybody's gonna have to do it, and all those tax breaks will go away, and
right,
right now, there's good tax breaks.
right, true.
Sorry?
I know, I was looking at getting a
Yeah.
Tesla, it's only $1,500 tax credit. Anyway,
any other thoughts on page 5?
I had some on the mitigation of unexpected financial risk.
Okay,
One of my, maybe it's my inability to understand, but it's the general fund reserve policy of 45%. And I think it's hard for me to see where that is in the budget. And so if you look at my section, I broke it down what we're supposed to be doing, but I don't
so
see.
you would like us to have a paragraph here addressing the reserves?
Yeah, so I just put it in there so that I could remind myself to ask Aaron, I guess. You know, that 45% general fund reserve, and so I looked at it, and it's 30% of the reserve for extreme events and public safety, 10% reserve for revenue volatility, and 5% reserve for expenditure volatility. And so where is that money?
And Aaron, we're referring to page 5 on document B.
D. on
Near the
document
bottom of
D.
the page.
Yeah, let me bring up some documents here. So in the budget document itself, just past this general fund schedule here,
Uh-huh,
you have the, revenue volatility reserve. You
Right.
saw those, right?
right.
Okay, so you're asking how is the math calculated?
Well, if the policy is 45% of expenditures, which is 51 million, so then there needs to be 23 million in cash reserves dedicated for this general fund reserve.
Correct, and it's not adding up for you, right?
Right,
Yeah. So, okay, I think we talked about this maybe last meeting
We
or the
did.
meeting before. So nowhere in the actual budget document do we go through and lay out the math for how we get there.
Right.
But you are absolutely correct that you cannot take just this 50.555 number and multiply it by 45% and get the reserve target you need to be at. Because buried in those operating expenditure numbers, when you look at the budget, the department detail sheets, the capital asset management, replacement.
Is built into there?
Is included in these numbers, but from a reserve standpoint, if we were to set our reserve levels to include that, we would be calculating reserves on reserves, because we take that money, let's say it's $100 for the
Oh, I
coming
see what
year.
you're saying, yeah,
We move it to a capital replacement fund,
yeah,
and so we're transferring the money out of the general fund through kind of the operating budget. And if, those are effectively like maybe capital reserves, though that's not technically accurate, but you could think of it like that. So if we were to calculate the 45% including those numbers, we would be just, again, reserves on reserves. So that's taking money that we could have otherwise used towards services.
And I guess if we were to back that out, and whatever that number is, and I'm not saying we have to calculate that now, but if we were to back that out and then take a look at, okay, we need X dollars in this reserve fund, we need X dollars in the volatility fund, and we need X dollars left over at the end of fiscal year in general fund, and if not, we're failing to meet policy. And so for me, I was trying to run that math, because I don't see, from my perspective, $20 million left over.
It's the combination of these three funds here. So it's the, 4.9 in Fund 1100.
Okay.
Plus the 2.455 in Fund 1110.
Okay.
And 12,732 in Fund 1120.
So we're getting there.
Yeah, so the other thing, so this actually, I want to bring up another point too. So this, see this negative $2 million right here?
Uh-huh.
So this is the extreme events, and that represents the money that council allocated out towards the Pearl loan program.
Right.
And the other thing we don't want to do either when we're calculating the reserve percentage is assume, or to back that, so if $20 million was our number, so I can do the quick math, and we were to calculate the reserves based on a cash balance in the reserve fund at 18 million, so taking out what we did for the Pearl program.
Okay.
We would have to be transferring $2 million back in, which, then we're taking $2 million from other services to fund that policy. And the reason that it's not being factored into the math, so, you establish what do we need to have. You look at what we do have, and then that's what we're transferring over. So if we transferred over based on 18 versus $20 million, we're taking $2 million that could have otherwise been spent towards, normal services, pushing it into the reserves when the Pearl loan program has personal guarantees and some other, requirements. That's the repayment mechanism to the reserve fund. So at this point, we're assuming that all gets paid back. Now, we'll have to deal with it if, somebody doesn't pay it back or whatever, in which case we'd be moving money likely from unassigned fund balance over there to cover the the shortfall.
Okay. And so are we meeting as a city the 45% general fund policy?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
If we weren't, we would have to indicate that to, council. And there's mechanisms built into the policy, where we have
what you can use it for and things,
and how long we have to repay it and that type of thing.
Okay, that's just kind of what I wanted more oversight and clarity on, because,
That
again.
was interesting. Good question, Danielle.
Great question.
Yeah.
Given all that,
I
Do
don't
we
know if
want
we
to
need to
include-
add anything.
Okay, all right. All right, any final thoughts?
I
additions?
do.
Okay,
Sorry. So if you want to, so nothing changed to A, so if you want to go to D. So one of the things that I wanted to add under page 3, water revenues. So one thing that we had discussed in previous meetings was the revenues of the water fund. It's anticipated for this projected fiscal year to increase 16 million. And that was either due to grants or, funding these projects. And for us to balance that budget, it's either coming from the taxpayers alone, which then has to go through a myriad of issues. And so part of me wants to highlight the fact that we're balancing the budget is because we're adding 16 million increase in the water fund.
so your request is to add on page 3 of document D, the last part, water revenues, your request
Right.
is to add that to the document. Aaron, could you just address that? I mean, if we add that, is that all accurate?
If it's accurate or not, may not be.
I thought the project to be paid by the water users.
Yeah, Aaron,
That's
while
the
you're
point.
doing that, it's so, there's a nuance, obviously.
Right.
You referenced taxpayers. Taxpayers would not be paying.
No, water users,
Water ratepayers.
right,
Water ratepayers, and there is a distinct difference. So
right.
Aaron's looking at it right now, he's processing it, and he'll
Okay,
answer the question.
fair enough.
So the 16,195,601, I'm assuming you took,
I just did the
This-
straight line math.
yeah. So that is, that has roughly $15 million in change built in for either a rate increase to ratepayers,
Right.
grant money, or some type of debt financing.
So that's what I want to add, that it's either going to be a rate increase to ratepayers, debt financing, or grant money.
And I should clarify that, no matter what happens, unless it's grant money, there will be an increased ratepayer. So it's whether we
Absolutely.
pay-go it or,
Right.
debt finance it, so.
And that's a big increase, so I think it is a specific item to note.
Can I just ask a question here? In another area of the budget, namely, pay raises, we don't budget that because we can't count on that happening. But
Contract.
right here, we're budgeting stuff that may happen. Can you just address that rationale? That you're kind of using a different.
Well, I think, so it's similar with the ARP money, right? All indications for the ARP money, right, are that we're gonna get it. Sidestepping a second to talk about the long-range forecast, we talked about the development projects, the ones that are included versus the ones that aren't, right? Anything that we have definitive information on, like they've pulled plans, council has approved it, gets factored into that forecast. Anything like, let's say, the hotel in the business park that has been talked about, but it hasn't gone anywhere yet, we don't put anything in for that. So it has to do with level of surety is what I would say it comes down to, in part. And so with the water projects, there's been a number of council meetings.
Right.
The mayor, sent the letter to County Water Authority back in summer of 2019, saying, hey, we need to, kind of work with you guys to look at this situation. And so we're in the design stages for all three projects, design and planning stages for all three projects. So from a surety standpoint, the projects going forward have a higher probability than not of commencing, right? Which means then funding these has a higher probability than not of paying for them. So, you know, on the salary side of things, because that is a process that is governed, you know, under the Myers-Milius-Brown Act, negotiating process, until we go through that process, we really can't put anything in there. You know, in part because then we're estimating something and that could cause issues with, the negotiations.
And I understand it in regards to the labor contracts. My question's more about the rationale here on budgeting these expenditures.
Because the projects have been approved or already going through the process, so they have to figure out how to pay for it. So they have to either pay for it by a bond measure, the water usage payers, or a grant. Those
Well,
are the three things.
And this is the proposed budget, right? So the capital projects are included in there for council's consideration.
Right.
And so, you know, we then also include in there for consideration the matching revenue that would be associated with that.
Right.
Um,
And so from my perspective, it is an item to note that in the 2021 budget, the city had 29 million in revenues, and then next year, they're anticipating over 45 million in revenues for water and the water budget. And, you know, I'm not saying the projects, that's not in my purview. The projects have to go forward based on what policies made and based on the voters and everything like that. How we pay for it is definitely something to note to city council, like, look, you know, let's take a look at some of these options, because otherwise it is going to be the water users in the city of Poway,
Well-
which could be a detriment to businesses, people living here. If it's expensive to run your tap to live in San Diego, to live in Poway, they're gonna go live in a different zip code.
So I think it's just important to reiterate that this project and every water project will be paid by the ratepayers. And
As
so-
of now.
No, as of forever. I think that, I'm wondering if you're getting at, are you arguing they should basically finance this so that it is paid over time in smaller increments versus a very large water increase all of a sudden to pay for it?
Yes, and so part of the section that I put in the next section, I have a debt service section.
But for this particular issue,
Right.
Are you?
Yeah, I would just say, if we're gonna start going down the road of recommending how the department handles,
No, but just like we're talking about the Poway Community Arts Center, how that has been a drag on the budget.
right, what I was gonna say is, if we're gonna go down that road, there's a lot of, I mean, we could fill up a whole nother memo with our thoughts on efficiencies, and, you know, I will always say that before the department ever considers a water rate increase, they should be, you know, every bit of efficiencies and cost-cutting measures should be taken. However, I just wonder if that's above and beyond, you know, as a BRC, maybe we need to focus that a bit, I'm thinking. And so,
Absolutely.
I guess, Aaron, in the interest of kind of moving this question along, Aaron, do you have any additional thoughts on this paragraph as presented by Danielle? And then we can discuss if we want to add it or not into the memo. So I would just say, for staff, if you know, if the 16.195 million is incorrect, or if we need to adjust this to be more accurate, please let us know.
But perhaps the thought can be that if there's committee concurrence if you want to reference this, and I'm not saying you should or not, but if you do decide you want to reference the fact that there is a higher budget item than typical, just simply acknowledge that, we're aware that there's, some, water projects moving forward, and, the budget will need to be, increased in order to pay for those moving forward. And we recommend you do that in the most thorough and thoughtful manner possible to ensure that ratepayers are, minimally impacted to the greatest degree possible, something along those lines. I'm not trying to give you words to use, but, I think
I like that, that sounds.
I do too.
I do too.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Okay.
That the council be mindful of the minimum impact to the water usage fee increases.
Yeah.
But, the sentence I put, the revenue increase will come from one or a variety of sources: water usage fees the community pays, grants, or bond measure financing.
I think the committee would recommend the most cost-effective way of funding
Right,
the project to minimally impact ratepayers.
right. And so instead of saying we recommend finance large one-time expenditures, say what you just said.
Yeah. Don't say anything too definitive, but say we strongly recommend you explore the most efficient options to minimize the impact on ratepayers.
Great.
I love
This is
that.
really good, yeah.
And then I just said a section of debt service, just from a financial aspect. I looked at the loans. And again, I don't even know if this is possible, and I'm gonna defer to you, Aaron, that, of the loans that we have outstanding, there is one that matures in 2033. If possible, it might be a consideration to refinance. I don't even know if that's even possible.
Yeah, so refinancing, so our standard
Or call
practice.
the loan.
Yeah, no, it functions quite identically, right?
Okay.
We go back out to the market and we repackage the debt at
Right.
whatever the current market rates are. So, with respect to the two that you indicated are set to mature in 2033, that's really, RDA debt. The city doesn't see a benefit from refinancing like they would on other types of, debt. 'Cause that money is flowing through the, repayment schedules from the state.
And what does RDA stand for?
Redevelopment Association, that redevelopment association was dissolved in, 2013, 14, 15, somewhere in there.
Okay.
And it was, by the state of California.
Perfect. That's all I wanted to know, so I put
Okay.
it in there. Thank you. So slash that.
Any other thoughts? Okay, seeing none, then I've got a bunch of edits here to make. That was a really good discussion, by the way. I appreciate all of that. I mean, I think, addressing the water stuff is hugely important, all of that. So thank you all. I'll take these edits. I will compile them into a final memo, and then, I'll send it to staff, and then they will notify the committee when it's ready, and we'll get signatures and all that. Are there any final thoughts from the committee?
Is it better to put, the BRC format also at the top where we are putting readability? Or
I'd
is
rather-
that something
I'd
you wanna
rather Put that
conclude
at the
with,
end.
that at the end?
Yeah. Yeah, and that would be my thought, but I'm open to anyone else's.
Yeah, just keep it at the end. We don't want to draw attention to that. I mean, it's not the most important,
Right,
thing here compared to the other stuff.
I agree.
Okay, with that, without any final comments, then I just want to thank everyone very much for this. It's been 3 years, it's been an honor and a pleasure, and it's been great working with staff. It's been great working with you, Peter, and everyone else on the committee, and good luck to everyone on future BRCs. With that, we'll turn it over to the city manager if he has any final comments.
Just quickly, I'll echo those sentiments of thankfulness, to the five of you for the time and effort. You put, at least 10 hours worth of time into just the meetings themselves. I know you probably spend at least that much time going through the budget, so we sincerely thank you and appreciate your efforts, and we do take these seriously, so please know that. A little bit of process, so June 15th, we are scheduled to bring the budget to council to request their approval. Typically how it's been in the past is that after Aaron presents the budget, the chair of the Budget Review Committee comes forward and pretty much kind of reads this into the record and shares the findings of the BRC with the council and the community. So I hope that, Brian, you're able to do that on that night on the 15th. And it's going to be a virtual meeting, I can tell you that. So you all are welcome to participate via Zoom. It hasn't been the past practice that any other member of the BRC spoke on it, but certainly you're entitled to do so. But I'd be mindful of redundancy, so we talk about efficiency all the time. So if you feel that Brian captures all your thoughts in the presentation, then just smile and applaud from behind would be my recommendation. And then again, from that point forward, it's effective on July 1, and we move forward. So again, our very sincere thanks for all you do. And once we get the document from you, Brian, we'll fact check it and get it all prepared for your individual signatures. So thank you.
Excellent. Thanks again, Brian. It's been great. You've been a great chair. And to everyone else and the staff,
Yes.
it's been a rewarding experience.
Second that.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you, and this meeting is adjourned.